According to NBC News, Google is drastically rolling back its diversity and inclusion programs, and many lefty activists are angry about it. Now, what makes this so strange is this story dropped only a few days after we heard that James Damour has dropped or asked a court to dismiss his discrimination lawsuit. According to the story from NBC News, Google is concerned about appearing biased against whites, Asians, and conservatives, conveniently what James Damour was suing over. Dare I say, I think the conservatives may have already won the culture war. I shouldn't say the conservatives, but the right faction, whatever it is. And now it's kind of a scraggler cleanup. There's still a few pockets here and there of leftist social justice types. There's still a few instances. I don't want to claim, I don't want to act like it's completely done, but this is a huge loss for the leftists, and it's a huge victory for the right. Let's read the story, and I want to break down some of what's going on for you. But I do have some interesting bad news if you're someone who is interested in the culture war and you lean to the right. They say current and ex-employees allege Google drastically rolled back diversity and inclusion programs. One well-liked diversity training program at Google called Shuttering was cut entirely, according to 7 former and current employees. Before I read this, there needs to be a disclaimer on this video. The reporter, April Glaser, was implicated in an activist action using her credentials as a journalist to get the Proud Boys banned from their bank, a story I had actually broken some time ago. When I saw this story, I found it very interesting that this social justice activist now works for NBC News and is writing about social justice. NBC News, you have a serious conflict of interest here, and you need to do something about it. They won't. They have to actually hire a lot of lefty activists. But take a look at this story from Epoch Times. Chase withdrew services to conservative business one day after Slate reporter's query. This is a story that I actually broke. I was leaked information. An email from this journalist was basically accusing. It seems as though. All right, I'll be very careful on how I phrase this. I'll give you the overview. What these people do is they'll see that, say, the Proud Boys are banking with Chase, and they'll send an email saying, "Hey, Chase, I'm a journalist and I'm going to write this big story and I'm just curious as to why you support white supremacy." They'll phrase it in that way. Chase panics and then bans the person, saying it's not worth the negative press. And that's the gist of what we've seen. In my general, I'll just call it my opinion, this reporter, first, she did send the email. She did make something about like, why would you support these people kind of statement. And then shortly after, the Proud Boys got banned. This is an activist tactic. You send an email, you load it, you freak them out, you tell them we're coming for you. This is what this woman was doing. And now NBC News has hired her and she is writing on these issues. Once again, a massive and major conflict of interest. NBC News, totally corrupt, man. She writes, and take it with a grain of salt, Google has significantly rolled back its diversity and inclusion initiatives in an apparent effort to avoid being perceived as anti-conservative, according to 8 current and former employees. Since 2018, internal diversity and inclusion training programs have been scaled back or cut entirely. 4 Google employees and 2 people who recently left the company told NBC News in interviews. In addition, they said the team responsible for those programs has been reduced in size, and positions previously held by full-time employees has been outsourced or not refilled after members of the diversity teams left the company. One well-liked diversity training program at Google called Sojourn, a comprehensive racial justice program created for employees to learn about implicit bias and how to navigate conversations about race and inequality, was cut entirely, according to 7 former and current employees. Sojourn offered its last training to Google workers in 2018, 4 current employees said. And by 2019, it was cut completely. 7 current and former employees from across a range of teams and roles at the company said separately that they all believe the reason behind cutting Sojourn and taking employees off diversity projects was to move them elsewhere at Google, was to shield the company from backlash from conservatives. The current and former employees agreed to speak to NBC News on the condition of anonymity for fear of reprisal for speaking to the press. This writer is an activist. She probably knows these people. This is a major conflict of interest. But you know what? Fine. We're getting the statements. I would argue that this story is an attempt to rally the left. to let them know this stuff is happening. So they selectively speak to one of their activist buddies who infiltrates NBC News. This is the problem with journalism. This is why I didn't want to work in the industry anymore after working at Vice and Fusion, which was an ABC News company. This is the problem. The deception, the lies, and the infiltration from political ideologues who care not for giving you the facts, who are just using it as a weapon for their ideological allies. Now, here's what I think's going on. Take a look at this story. Ex-Google engineer who alleged discrimination against conservative white men asks judge to dismiss lawsuit. The story came on May 10th, so about 4 days ago. Very interesting. I was curious as to why James Damour, who I believe was repped by Harmeet Dillon, why they would dismiss this case. And they likely can't speak about it. I think it's a major victory. That's my personal opinion. When you see this other news from NBC News and the panic when they rush to one of their activist buddies to spread, help, help, we're under attack. The conservatives are winning. Let's read a little bit and I'll tell you what I think's going on. They say the high-profile discrimination dispute between Google and one of its former software engineers has quietly come to an end. Ex-Google employee James Damour has moved to dismiss his lawsuit against the internet giant 2 years after alleging discrimination against conservative white men. Damour worked as an engineer at Google before being fired in 2017 after criticizing the company's efforts to improve diversity among its workforce. He made the controversial assertions in a memo that circulated throughout the company, triggering an internal culture war. On Thursday, Damour and 3 other men involved in the suit made a written request to the Santa Clara Superior Court in California to drop the charges. Google also signed the motion, which was first spotted by Bloomberg. This matter is dismissed in its entirety, Judge Brian Walsh wrote in the order. A lawyer for the men told Bloomberg his clients are prohibited from saying anything beyond what's in the court filing. While Damour's discrimination allegations have been put to rest, it's no secret that tech companies, including Google, Twitter, and Facebook, have a diversity problem. Now we can see the journalists loading up their language and going for the activist attack. Let me tell you what I think happened. I could be wrong about this. I don't know. I think they won. Perhaps James Damour and the other people involved ran out of money. That's possible, but I really doubt it because I'd imagine in this instance, with the high-profile nature of the case, if they were on the verge of losing due to funding, they'd probably just ask for funding and they would get it. And boy, would they. If they really needed money, they could probably raise $1 million overnight. People are going to dump money. It's a culture war issue. No, I think they won. I think, and again, this is just heavy speculation. I think Google knew they were going to lose. They knew it was going to be very, very bad precedent for the company, bad press, and a settlement could be seen as Google losing. CNN recently settled the Covington kids, and that's seen widely as a defeat because CNN didn't fight back. They gave in and gave the kids what they asked for, or there was an agreement, right? Typically, settlement will be viewed as some kind of defeat. And I think it's fair because that's actually one of the goals for many suits. Just get them to pay out so you win. In this instance, perhaps Google did something, met some criteria, paid some money that satisfied Damour and these other men involved and their legal team. And thus they said, okay, we'll dismiss the case and we'll leave it at that. If Google agreed to settle the case, maybe James Damour and the crew refused a settlement. Maybe this was the only way they could actually get it done. But considering the other story from NBC News, where we're hearing they've been shutting these programs down, or if we can believe it, to be honest, because the writer's an activist, I think James Damour won. I think this is how they got their victory. Google found a clever way to not publicly lose, but still give these individuals what they wanted. Take a look. This is hilarious. They say in 2018, Google pledged to focus on its diversity efforts on its least represented demographic, Black and Hispanic women. The company has since made some modest gains, according to its 2020 diversity report. In the U.S., the percentage of Black hires grew from 4.8 to 5.5 in 2019, a 0.7% rise. I don't see why any of that matters at all. And it's fascinating to me that the problem people find with Google is there are too many white men and Asian men. If there is an issue of people not being qualified to get hired, then you've got cultural problems outside of Google. The people who are advocating for these policies don't seem to understand that you have cultural issues. Why is it that these companies don't hire people? It's not because they're overtly racist. I mean, I got to be honest. I would say a lot of Asian countries are very racist. Hey, it's the way it is, I guess. I don't know why. I'm being part Korean and having, visited there and talked to people. Yeah, they got racism problems. But look, you've got to hire people because they know how to do the job. You got to hire people because they're the best. Hiring people simply because of their race is very, very weird. Now, I get it. There are some initiatives to try and find people who are qualified and who meet this racial criteria, but I find it very, very creepy when you're like, we need you to look this way. That to me is not, that's weird. But anyway, back to more to the point. I think we're seeing something beyond just this story. We're seeing something strange happen. We saw those victories, okay, in California's 25th, a 21-point swing in favor of Republicans. Wisconsin's 7th was a plus 6-point lead for Republicans. The district in Wisconsin is an R plus 8. They won by 4. The guy there, Tiffany, won by 14 points. Not the same as Trump in 2016, but still very, very, a very, large gain off the average. Take a look at this, though. Something I covered the other night. Taylor Lorenz of the New York Times says, are you even an Instagram influencer if you haven't posted the full pandemic video to your millions of followers this week? Noting that one influencer at one point was wearing Ruth Bader Ginsburg socks, calling herself a nasty woman. She was a hashtag resistance influencer. Now she's all about pandemic and QAnon, and she really believes it. Someone brought up, here we go. She says, people think, oh, these influencers are just doing it for traffic. But that's not it. Many people deeply believe this stuff now. They don't care if they lose some followers because they see these dangerous conspiracies as the truth and are intent to spread it. Now take a look at Google shutting things down. I'm not here to tout the veracity of conspiracy theories. I'm saying these people who were once the resistance on social media are flipping to the other side. And it's kind of an extreme flip from far left to not necessarily, I hate the term far left, far right, like entrenched leftist culture war to entrenched right culture war. And I say that with some, it's the conspiracy stuff isn't necessarily right wing like the media tries to smear it, because many, regular Trump supporters, conservatives don't believe in a lot of this stuff. But I guess it's fair to say that most liberals don't believe in this weird resistance stuff either, but they're also not active at all. So you have inactive liberals, active conservatives, and then you have the entrenched fringes. Let's read a little bit more, see what they say at NBC News. They say, quote, one of the major motivations for cutting Sojourn is that the company doesn't want to be seen as anti-conservative, one employee familiar with the program said. It does not want to invite lawsuits or claims by right-wing employees about Google discriminating against them. And that could be it. James Damour. Here's another potential scenario. James Damour made allegations of bias. So Google cuts these programs down over the past few years. Thus, James Damour loses. James Damour and his crew says, you're discriminating. Google goes, we got rid of them all. You're going to sue us now? They're gone. And maybe they said, okay, I guess that's it. Or James Damour said, so long as you have these, once Google said we got rid of them, he said, okay, we'll drop the suit. I don't know exactly. These things are always private. But I will say I am kind of upset that Damour dropped his suit, because you need a major public statement. I guess going up against Google is very, very difficult. And maybe they got some major victories, and the unseen victories are better than the public statements. Maybe, you know what? But I think for the most part, you need to make a statement to the people about if you won or not, because right now it could potentially be a defeat. I mean, on the surface, simple solution appears they gave up. Seeing this story, however, I think it's a victory. They go on to write, Melanie Parker, Google's chief diversity officer, disputed the allegation that Google has scaled back its diversity and inclusion efforts. We're really maturing our programs to make sure we're building our capacity, she said. Parker added that changes Google is making to its diversity and inclusion work is focused on the need to provide a scalable solution across the globe. Google acknowledged it had ended Sojourn, but said it was not in reaction to conservative criticism. Sojourn ran for 3 years, Google said, and it was too difficult to scale globally, since it was focused on issues of racism in the United States and didn't apply to the rest of the world where Google has offices. Google and the majority of its workforce are based in the U.S. 4 sources familiar with the Sojourn curriculum said the training was designed to be intensive, requiring multiple classes in small cohorts, and that the project was always intended to roll out slowly as the team learned how to scale up such an in-depth program. Working to reduce bias and address sensitive topics such as racial privilege and discrimination can't be done in a single session, the 4 sources familiar with the Sojourn curriculum said. One very fascinating thing is that, assuming you can trust this woman, which I think you can't, but we'll take it with a grain of salt, is that we're learning that Google has essentially dogmatic ideological programming for its employees. And that is creepy. That is very, very creepy, man. Could you imagine if you got a job and they forced you to take some religious programming? This stuff is ideology. It's not fact. It's not, it's not improving your abilities in any tangible sense. It is specifically an ideological, dogmatic system where they believe in things that aren't based in fact. Now, you can make arguments about racism, about diversity, about inclusion, but what they're talking about with sensitivity trainings and diversity trainings and privilege, these things are not fact. That's just reality. I'm sorry. The idea of white privilege is an opinion, not a fact. Because, and I tell you this because right now I know there's a bunch of lefties going like, no, we know that white people, no, stop. It's not true. It's not a fact. I'm sorry. It's an opinion. An academic opinion, maybe, but it is an opinion, not a fact. They argue that white people have certain privileges, when in the reality, certain privileges can be granted people based upon their class, the clothing they wear, the shoes they're wearing, the money they have, their status. So they say it's based on whiteness, but you go to foreign countries like China and you don't have those same privileges. Thus, it's not about being white. It's about majority. It's about culture. It's about human psychology. They are making this about race because they aren't smart enough to understand psychology, evolutionary psychology, human behavior. That's why you got to talk to smarter people like Brett Weinstein, for instance. Who knows, he could probably give you a better explanation of this stuff than I could. Now, I certainly think on the surface, you can make arguments about racial privilege, but it doesn't make sense in the end when you realize you've got someone like, Serena Williams, who's a multimillionaire, a black woman. She certainly has more power, more privilege than a homeless white man. Yet, according to their ideology, she's oppressed. And I'm not exaggerating. They write stories about how oppressed she is, about how the refs were being mean to her and all this stuff. And it's like, this is fake. It's completely absurd. There was one story where she broke her racket or something and got in trouble. And they said, well, that wouldn't happen to a man. And it's like, it does. You're comparing individuals to each other, different refs, judges, whatever. But that's really how they view the world. And you've got major companies like Google preaching this stuff. So let's get to the final thought on this. Listen, I think the conservatives have been winning for a while. I've made several videos where I've said, like, the right is winning the culture war. The conservatives are winning the culture war. Winning is not won. But I view this right now as kind of like the conservatives have taken the field and now the leftists are in full retreat. There are still things that have come out that are, full on, leftist. Take a look at the fact that this writer herself is an activist for social justice causes who has used her title as journalist to target her ideological enemies. It still exists. These people, these culture warriors are still infiltrating journalism to cause damage to their political rivals. This story is likely an effort to rally the troops. So maybe the war isn't completely over. But I believe the right faction is winning. And you take a look at Donald Trump's victories. You take a look at the influencers now going from resistance to, whatever they're becoming. They're certainly abandoning this. I'm hearing there's anecdotal stories popping up on Twitter. People saying things like in California's 25th that many regular people have woken up to how bad and awful the left and the Democrats have become. And so they're now jumping ship. You have the Gallup poll that I love citing this, showing that approval for Republicans in Congress has surpassed Democrats for the first time in decades. It was a longstanding trend that people approved of Democrats more than Republicans. It's flipped. Something has happened. People are finally waking up. Now, what you got to understand when it comes to this culture war is it's not conservatives like, people in the 90s would believe it to be. And that's one of the big problems. Many of these default liberals right now, they still have a view of the Republican Party like it was in the 90s and the 2000s. And that's just not accurate. They've changed from a moral authoritarian to a more, libertarian populist coalition. And you still have remnants of the old Republican establishment fleeing. You still have old, look, the Republican establishment types went full on never Trump. And Trump's base are like moderate libertarian types for the most part. Not all of them. Many are staunch conservatives. But they've also attracted a bunch of people through walk away. So when you have these old default liberals walking away and joining, MAGA, you still have a lot of default liberals who don't know what's really happening. And they assume the Republicans are still bad until they see that's their friend. Like, whoa, hey, man, I knew you. I'll tell you a story. I went to the Deplorable, which was a big Trump supporter event in 2017, I had a bunch of people come up to me and be like, oh, hey, Tim Pool, and shook my hand wearing MAGA hats. And I was like, oh, wow, I didn't realize I had, Trump supporters would be following me. And they said, oh, we've been following you since Occupy Wall Street. And I was like, wait, Occupy Wall Street? The big lefty, libertarian, whatever. And they were like, oh, yeah. A lot of the people during Occupy were anti-establishment, challenging the big banks. They flipped for Trump very, very quickly. A lot of Bernie supporters flipped for Trump. And there at this Trump rally, this Trump party, were people wearing MAGA hats. Many people started jumping ship and going the anti-establishment populist route. Now, many of these people were in it for Bernie, for sure, more lefty. Some of those people threw their hat in for the establishment because they thought that was their path to victory. They learned their lesson twice now, I guess. And a lot of those Bernie supporters just went and voted for Trump. So I think it's not so much that conservatives are winning, but it's the right faction of the culture war. The left is waning. They attack their own. They eat their own. They kick them out. And they are losing power at these big companies. We'll see how it plays out. I don't think the war is completely over, but it certainly looks like conservatives have stormed the field with a story like this. Google backing down. Maybe they're not. We'll see. But that's what the story says. If you want to trust this activist, I believe the reason I will take this story seriously and think Google's actually doing this is the Damour lawsuit, but also I think this activist lady is trying to fire a flare to all of the woke activists like, quick, we got to do something, like, here's the story, because that's what she does. NBC News should fire her, should never have hired her. Well, I don't know if I should go that far because I hate the idea of cancel culture, but NBC News needs to stop hiring activists. There's others and they lie all the time. So who can you really trust? Not these people. So take it with a grain of salt. I'll leave it there. Stick around. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel, and I will see you all then.